Hello, everyone, and welcome back to an all-new episode of Asked and Answered, the most hostile, unforgiving advice show on YouTube.
I am tell you how we feel.
Like it or not. You'll take your answers. Get what you get, and you don't get upset. I'm here with Erin Lowry, friend, personal finance pioneer, owner of a very nice dog.
Yeah. She is very nice. We both have wonderful dogs, different sizes.
Although they've been known to get on a friendly walk together,
yeah,
and to coexist.
I think that's the best you can ask with the big size discrepancy.
Yeah, my dog is like 9 pounds and her dog is what?
62.
62.
And recently weight shamed by the vet. Should be a tight 57.
Ooh. So basically she's 7 of my dog. 7 Monas. But we are here to answer your most pressing questions about all things financial. And we are doing so, as always, in partnership with my beloved advisor.com. Today we're going to be talking about debt and credit, two topics that used to be extremely fraught and upsetting for me, topics which are no longer, because I have kind of healed my relationship with money, at least in that regard. And part of me sort of leveling up on my journey financially after I got out of debt and rehabbed my credit score and all of those things was to start working with a financial advisor, something that's just really sort of helped me process all of my long-term financial goals in a way that not only relieves a lot of mental load, but just makes me feel, I don't know, like I'm a competent adult who is making really good decisions and investing in my future. If you've ever been curious about working with a financial advisor, I want to first and foremost say you don't already have to be rich to do it, especially depending on the type of advisor you work with. We personally here at TFD work with and endorse advisor.com because they are really cool. We just love working with them. But they're also a flat fee model, which we really support and I think is also a lot more accessible for people who are just kind of on an earlier part of their financial journey. It also adds a nice level of transparency. They work for you and not commissions. If you've ever been curious about potentially working with a financial advisor, just use the link in our description to set up a free call. It costs nothing. You get to ask all your questions, both about money generally and about what it means to work with an advisor. See if you like it. And for being a member of our community, you get an exclusive discount on your first year working with them. We highly recommend them, but cost nothing. Check it out. Link in our description. But with that said, we have a lot of questions about credit, debt, and drowning in those things. You're someone who's never been in credit card debt.
That's correct.
Congratulations. I'm someone who used to be in credit card debt, but I am now so good at using credit cards that I am a Diamond Medallion member on Delta.
What's the minimum spend for Diamond? It's like $250,000. Is it business?
First of all, yes, all business purchases are also filtered through the card as much as possible. So that's part of it. But also, I had a lot of rollover over the years, which I converted
those MQMs or whatever that was.
I converted them into and also my husband gave me some of his miles because he was nowhere near going to be able to reach any nice status. So, engaging in offsetting the gender imbalance in our own marriage. But yeah, suffice to say, now I'm like a full-on credit card hacker.
Which is amazing.
Recently got to put myself for free in business class on an international flight.
I mean, that's the coupon.
Dream. You get 4 of those a year, by the way, if you're Diamond.
It's a dream.
It is a dream. It's the highest thing any American citizen can aspire to, I think.
But to your point about me not having credit card debt, I think for those who are listening who have children or people in their life that are younger, especially those who are aging towards maybe getting a credit card, my dad, some of the best advice he ever gave me was truly about how to use a credit card. And particularly when we were of age at 18, we could easily get access to credit, which was a more dangerous time. Right now, it's a little bit harder thanks to the Card Act, which I can spout off about later if people are interested. But it was very, very easy in 2007 when I was 18 to get access to a credit card. And my dad was fortunate. We talked about privilege in a previous episode. I think financial privilege in terms of even instilling knowledge is a huge asset. And my dad explained how to use a credit card and how credit scores worked. And that's actually how I worked on building credit in college. Is I got access to one credit card. It had a $500 limit. It was for college students. I would make one purchase a month on it and pay it off on time and in full. And I was able to graduate with a pretty healthy credit score. And just having that knowledge. Also, being instilled a bunch of other life lessons as to not take it out and use it for other things, which is what's very tempting and easy to do in your early 20s. But being told how credit cards worked was huge because they do not make it easy to understand how they work, which is part of how some people do end up in debt very young.
No, I would go so far as to say their business model is predicated on most people not using it right, getting themselves into credit card debt.
Minimum due is very confusing.
And confusing, and intentionally so. Yeah. And you also, student debt, you didn't have any, but then you married into student debt. Is that right?
I sure did. So I made my college decision based on the parental help that I had, which was 50%. And then I had scholarships to the school that I went to. But then my husband was not in the same position, and he had about $50,000 of student loan debt by the time we got married. So we paid that off in the first couple of years of our marriage, right before the pause happened on student loans. Famously paid them off December of 2019. So that was fun. But it was, a real experience too of, even though I didn't get it myself going through college, still ended up having the experience.
Look at that. You know what? You got grandfathered in through love to the tyranny of student debt. And though I don't have a degree and only went to a community college, still did have a very small amount, 4 figures of student debt from more irresponsible choices, which is to say taking out student loans to not have to work during my studies, which I very much should have. Well, I still worked, but I should have worked more. But I chose to take out those student loans and, spend them on a lifestyle I didn't need to be living. Like, for example, I could have lived at home. No, I wanted to live in a rented apartment and all of those things. But yeah, so I'm definitely someone who did not use debt wisely for a long time and very much lived to regret it. It took me the better part of a decade to get my credit score back to a good, I think, well, now excellent, but a good score because it had been so thoroughly beaten and taken to the cleaners. Because I, to be clear, let my credit card debt go to collections.
It's so easy, though. I mean, if we want to start specifically on credit scores and credit history, it is insanely easy in this country to have it ruined because of medical debt.
Oh, yes.
Especially medical debt that you did not even realize that you had. The number of people that I personally know who have had like a $30 copay type situation they didn't even realize they owed because maybe the letter never arrived or it went to a previous address or what have you. And all of a sudden they find out because they see that their score has tanked because maybe it's connected to their credit card or they're just proactive about checking or what have you. Or they just get a call from a collections agency over a very small amount of money, where obviously for some people it's larger debts that go to collections, but it can be just as simple as $30, $40 that you just didn't know you owed that just will tank your score, and that will make the rest of your financial life more expensive for a period of time.
Aren't we so lucky to live in this system and to in no way be able to opt out of it? But don't worry, guys. Elon Musk is running around the White House with his scissors pointed open and just cutting and chopping and slicing. And we can only imagine that that's going to make all of this drastically better. The first person asks, I have accrued a lot of credit card debt. What can I do to pay it off? I don't know where to start.
The very first thing to do of any type of debt, credit cards, student loans, personal loans, what have you, is face the numbers. So by that, I mean this credit card debt, when you say a lot, I usually assume that it's over a few different cards, not just exclusively on one. So getting out pen and paper, whatever you want to use. I personally like pen and paper. Writing down the principal balance, so the main amount that you owe on each individual card. Write down the interest rate that you're paying on each individual card, and then the minimum amount due on each card. It is not until you have all of that information that you can really start to formulate a plan. And we can get into in a minute about debt avalanche, debt snowball. Those are two very popular methods for paying off debt. But the other thing too that you can consider is whether or not you want to consolidate this debt in any way. So that could look like taking out a personal loan and putting all of that debt, using the personal loan to pay off all of the debt. If you have a lot of credit card debt, though, you might not have a very high credit score, and a personal loan is probably not your best answer because it still could come with a very high interest rate. Another option is something known as a balance transfer. So this is when you get a promotional rate, usually 0% for a period of time, and you can roll over that debt. So let's say that you have one card that has $3,000 at 25% APR, the interest rate, and you can move all of that over to a credit card at 0% for 18 months. but you have to pay a 3% fee. So if you have to pay a 3% fee on a $3,000 bill that you're rolling over, that's $90, which sounds like a lot at the time, but the amount of money you'll be saving in interest by moving from 25% to zero is huge. So every payment you make is then going towards the principal balance. Now, there are a ton of caveats when it comes to a balance transfer because I feel like it sounds like a magic bullet. It is not. A couple of things to consider. One, how did you end up in credit card debt? If it is because medical emergencies popped up, life got very expensive, things had to get financed on credit cards, as sometimes happens, that's one situation. But if it's because you tend to overspend and it's hard for you to handle your consumption patterns and how much you spend for a multitude of reasons, then adding another credit card to the mix, probably just going to be tempting and not the right answer. So you really need to be introspective about whether or not you can get a balance transfer credit card and truly not spend a dime on it, because that's the other huge tip here is if you're going to do a balance transfer, put it away, don't keep it in your wallet, don't link it to anything, just use it to pay off the debt aggressively. If you do a balance transfer, I know this is getting a little technical, but also if you're going to do a balance transfer, make sure you get an offer where the debt or the interest is waived and not deferred. Those two terms are incredibly important. If the interest is waived on your balance transfer offer, and let's say you had 18 months to pay off $3,000, and you know what? You paid off $2,000, but you just couldn't get to that last $1,000. Well, then at the end of the balance transfer promotional period, it will go from 0% interest to something more typical, like maybe 21%. And you'll owe 21% each month on that $1,000. That's if it's waived. If it's deferred interest and you don't manage to pay off the balance, they will basically charge you back interest on the amount that you rolled over for all of those months. You absolutely never want to mess with a promotional offer of any kind that is deferred interest. You only want waived. All of that is a preamble to debt snowball and debt avalanche, but do you want to take that?
Girl, you're on a roll. Keep going. I'm sad.
So the other part to consider, so those are just kind of two technical strategies. You could look to consolidate with a personal loan, but if you have a lower credit score, and by that I mean under 680, you're probably going to be sat with a bit of a high interest rate on a personal loan. It's not necessarily going to be your best bet. The only advantage is if you have multiple credit cards, you're consolidating into one payment every month, which could make your life easier. The other part is looking at that balance transfer, moving from a high interest rate to a 0% or a very low interest rate, which makes it easy to pay aggressively. But if neither of those sound good, because maybe you don't want to mess with another credit card or you wouldn't get approved, you also want to consider debt repayment plans like debt snowball or debt avalanche. I'm going to try to explain it quickly, but honestly, there might be a 3-minute guide video in the TFD archives that explains how they work with numbers on the board, which is very helpful. But with debt snowball, you want to think about it like it's the makes my brain happy because I get little wins very quickly version. You're going to rank your debt from the lowest amount you owe to the highest amount you owe. Any excess money you have every month, you're going to put towards that smallest debt. Now, key here is that you're going to make your minimum payments on all of the debts you owe. This is not, I'm going to press pause on these payments and put all of my money towards the smallest one. It's you pay all of your minimums, but any extra money you have, you add it to the minimum payment of your smallest balance debt. The reason you do that is it's the smallest balance. You're going to pay it off the fastest. It's going to make you feel good and give you the motivation to keep pushing on. So that minimum payment that you were paying on the smallest, you're now going to combine it, the extra money that you have after you pay it off, combine it with the minimum of your next smallest debt. And it's a snowball. It goes from small to bigger and bigger until you're finally using all of that money from all the previous minimum payments on your debts to pay off the largest balance payment debt that you have. It's much easier when you can see numbers on a screen. So maybe we put a link in the description to the 3-minute guide video. Debt avalanche is you're focusing on interest rates instead of the amount that you owe. So you're not really fixated on the size of the debt, you're fixated on the interest rate of the debt. You want to go from highest interest rate to lowest interest rate and get aggressive about that because paying off the highest interest rate debt first is going to save you the most money in the long run. And people always ask, which one is better? It doesn't matter. What matters is the one that's going to keep you motivated. If you're motivated by seeing those incremental wins along the way and that's going to keep you motivated, go with debt snowball. If you want to stick it to your lenders as best you can and you're really motivated by saving money, go with debt avalanche or do a hybrid method. It doesn't matter, just as long as you actually have a plan in place. Also, I just want to clarify, you want to combine the debt snowball, debt avalanche strategy with a balance transfer. They're not exclusive.
T. All of that was true. Yeah, I had nothing to add. Next. This is, it feels a little disrespectful to call it juicy, but it is juicy. So recently, my entire world fell apart when my husband tearfully confessed to me that he has racked up almost $60,000 in credit card debt after losing his job and being afraid to tell me. He's the primary breadwinner. He works in tech, so he's always had pretty high-paying jobs. And apparently the firing was a result of political drama within the company, and since then he struggled to get a new job, which he thinks is retaliatory from his old boss. Long story. Anyway, he broke down and went over everything, and I was just basically sitting there on the couch in shock, just nodding my head. I do have a job, but I'm a social worker, so I don't make nearly enough to cover our entire household budget, let alone pay off his debt, which, as you can imagine, is very high interest. But I do love him, and aside from this issue, we've always had a really wonderful marriage. I believe that he's a good man who got in over his head and spiraled out of control financially. And even in the immediate aftermath of this news, he's been very gentlemanly and taking things head on. For example, since our conversation, he's been living with his parents while I just try to get my head back on straight and have the house to myself. He's been working app and gig jobs to put as much cash as he can towards the debt and looking into consolidation options. Like, even in this devastation, I can feel that he is still a good man, but I also feel so betrayed and blindsided. In the first days after he told me, I was sure I would leave him, but in the weeks since, I've been going back and forth like 100 times a day. Luckily, we don't have children yet, so at least there is that to not worry about. But even that is complicated. Like, I thought we would start trying for a family this year, and now that next step feels a million miles away. Our home that I was so proud of us purchasing now feels like a burden to me. My career that I love feels completely insufficient. I guess my question is, should I forgive him? And if I do, what should the next steps be financially?
I just preached on the last one. How about you start with this one?
Yeah. To this person, first and foremost, I am so sorry. That is devastating. That is absolutely devastating. If you're asking, let me make sure I understand what you're asking.
Should you
forgive him? My honest answer is no. I think you can forgive him as a human being, but if I were in your position, I don't think I would stay married to this person. I think it is a level of betrayal that would make it very difficult for me to ever trust that person again, because there is a depth to the deception. There is a depth to the financial devastation. There is a depth to the selfishness of it, even if it came out of anxiety, embarrassment, fear, whatever the case may be. You outlined in your question so many ways in which this impacts you. Obviously, financially, it's probably put having children on hold for at least now, if not quite some time. It's made it so you may have to get a different job. You can't afford your house. Like, there are so many layers to it, on top of the fact that to rack up to almost $60,000 in debt, I don't know your lifestyle, but I would imagine that's at least several months of deceiving you every day. I also imagine, I don't know what the work situation is like, but like pretending to be working every day, pretending to still have a job, like that, to me, that is just a level of betrayal that I just personally could never get over. So my answer, like, you can forgive a person. I think forgiveness in situations like this is kind of beside the point, in the sense that whether or not you forgive them in the sense of like, I am no longer upset with you, I guess, is what that would maybe mean in this context. To me, when it comes to protecting yourself and being able to share a life with someone and to trust them, because that is ultimately the foundation of any shared life, I don't think there's any way in which you can release that, because at least for me, again, given the scale and the depth of it, I don't see how you could ever meaningfully intermingle your finances with that person again, personally. So I don't think forgiveness really has too much of a role to play in this scenario, aside from, I guess, just like the nice emotional thing to do. That is my answer to the first part. I'm sorry. What is your answer?
I'm with you. I don't think I could move beyond that. That's a level of financial infidelity that is very much on par with an extramarital affair of the physical fidelity variety. Like that, I think for some reason people often think that physically cheating is kind of the worst act that can happen in a marriage where that's definitely not true for a variety of reasons, but financial infidelity, especially to this magnitude, is a breach of trust in such a way that it will have long-lasting scars for years. You may not ever fully trust your partner again. So then the question becomes, if you're only able to trust 60%, 75%, even just 90%, what does that mean for you mentally and emotionally to carry on in this relationship? This is an odd twist. Can you afford to get divorced now? Is another piece of this puzzle, which we can come back to a little bit. But to have that much debt, for which you might be partially on the hook for, depending on state law, where you live, where you got married, what divorce law looks like, how long you've been married, is it exclusively in his name or was it on joint credit cards? There is a lot here to consider if you wanted to go forward with a divorce or a separation. But it is really important also to consider that if you elect to stay, for whatever reason that is completely valid, if you decide you do not want to go through with a divorce or to leave him, you have to decide in your own mind what is going to make you trust him again, and you need to communicate that with him. And it could also mean a level of oversight that you would have over his financial life and your financial life as a couple that is then no longer tenable for him. Does it mean that every month you're checking your credit report and his credit report? Does it mean that you are getting alerts on every single piece of, every single credit card he has? You get an alert when a purchase has been made. You get a daily balance update via text or email. Is it that there's some sort of severe consequence if he breaches the boundary of trust again? Severe, I assume, would be divorce. There's a lot to think through and talk through, but then that can also be a type of oversight that he then can no longer live within that ecosystem. So he might decide that this is not going to work out for him too. There's just so much to unpack here.
The thing that bothers me the most about this question is when she's talking about him being like so kind and gentlemanly and in the aftermath and doing the right things, which I feel like, to me, you brought up actual like physical infidelity. Like, to me, it just sounds so much like how, like, let's say a man who cheats on his wife would behave after he was caught. Mm-hmm. Like, to be doing all of those things you listed is the bare minimum of how someone would need to behave if they had just betrayed you to such a magnitude. Like, and I think that is often, like, we see so much in heterosexual marriages, men being, celebrated for doing an absolute minimum when it comes to any aspect of the domestic life. And this to me feels like an extreme example of it, of like, of course he should be putting money toward the debt. He should have been doing that all along. Like, if he was going to pretend to be working a job for 6 months, why wasn't he working fake, like actual side jobs during that time to put the money toward it? Like, why wouldn't he have just moved in with his parents in the first? Like, there are so many questions to me that are, the fact that he's doing these things now is almost not worse, but it's like, it's only happening now after everything has imploded. Like, that to me is not to be celebrated. That's the bare minimum. And I do feel like you mentioned you were going to start trying for a family. Is this the kind of man you want to raise children with? Like, that to me is one of the biggest questions. And I think what bothers me so much about how marriage is framed in our society, especially to women, is that we so oversell the romantic aspect of it and so undersell the life partner and the financial partner aspect of it. And like, I am someone who has a life partner. I'm also someone who has business partners to whom my financial long-term is tied up quite significantly. If one of my business partners were to have done something of this magnitude, embezzled $60,000, forged payroll documents, lied about work, like anything of this magnitude that would have jeopardized my financial health, the business's financial health, whatever, I would sue them. And of course, I would get them out of the company immediately. Like, it would be fire and brimstone. But we don't necessarily take that same tact when it comes to someone who has betrayed us if they are a romantic partner, which I fear perpetuates a cycle where women are tolerating so many things that they should not tolerate because that's what you do in the name of love. And to your point, you don't even know to what extent you personally are liable for this debt. So my first of all, and maybe this is an unpopular opinion, but yes, marriage is supposed to be a shared burden of life, but not when one person betrays you. Like if he got $60,000 of medical debt out of his control, I would say it's your duty as a married couple to treat that as a joint responsibility. If he's in $60,000 of debt because he lied to you for months on end, that is his problem. And I personally think you should not put a dime toward that debt. And so even if you're not going to divorce him, my first stop, like financially, that is his responsibility. My first stop would be to a divorce lawyer, even if you're not going to divorce him, to see what you're responsible for, how we can immediately do everything we can to separate and disentangle your finances, and to get you like a 360 level of visibility over everything that man is doing forever. But again, to me, to have to live like that defeats the purpose of marriage in the first place. Marriage is supposed to make life easier because you are tackling things as a team and a partnership. Now it is making your life harder because you are being weighed down by someone who felt it was better to betray you to the tune of $60,000 than to be honest with you about a terrible life event.
It also begs a lot of questions about why he felt the need to lie to you about job loss and to keep up this kind of facade. And sure, it is uncomfortable and frustrating and embarrassing to lose your job, particularly if it happens in some sort of big political way at work. People lose their jobs. Like a lot of people lose their jobs. It's not the same, but I've lost clients before, and my husband's like the first text or call, or then as soon as he walks in the door, I'm telling him about this like frustrating thing that happened to me during the day. And if it has a big financial consequence, we certainly would have game planned out what that meant for us. That's your person. That's who you should turn to in times of crisis. So the fact that he didn't do that, not making this an indictment on you at all. This is not a victim blame. This is what is it about him that makes it so that he doesn't feel comfortable coming to you in a time like that? Because I can tell you that parenting is just going to make things far more complicated. Things happen, things get hard. Mistakes will be made. And if it's about a child, withholding major information is huge. So yes, embarrassing, sure. But to withhold something just because you might be embarrassed is a big character flaw in a person. And that is something you also need to be investigating a little bit, is why did he do that?
I want to say, and I will tread lightly because I obviously don't have any more information than what we've heard, but the combination of fired abruptly for political reasons at his company, didn't tell you about it, and can't get another job because he thinks his boss is sabotaging him, does not pass the sniff test to me. I would be very curious to know what actually led to that man being let go from his job, because my husband works in tech. This is not to say there's no political, every industry has its own politics and things like that. Generally speaking, if you've had a very good lucrative career in tech, these are eminently hireable people. And in fact, in America, there's usually a shortage of talent in tech. They're always being recruited all the time. Again, especially if they've had a very good career. To be blacklisted overnight, something is very, and if it really were an issue of your boss is acting in a malevolent way and thwarting your career, like, again, my husband works in tech. If you were like a well-paid tech guy, you would like sue the pants off of someone. Like you would fight like hell. These are people, these are very like, I don't know. This is just something about this story is very suspicious to me. And one of the first things I would do is launch a full investigation into what happened with that firing and why he is now not working in a different job. Like I would be banging down the door of that company and I'd be like, get me to HR. Like what happened? And people don't enter into marriages thinking they'll be betrayed or abused or cheated on. People marry people thinking that they're making the best decision of their lives and they found their life partner. And then look what happens. Look what happens. And I'm again, my heart goes out to you, and you can always just like, girl, email me if you want to talk further, but I would absolutely leave this man. No question in my mind.
And the other part of it too, just generally, marriage typically is the biggest financial decision you're ever going to make.
Oh yeah.
Because partnering with somebody in that way, has so many implications. And again, to tie back to kind of how society treats marriage, even the idea of a prenup, the fact that that is taboo in any way is so insane to me, because you are signing a legally binding agreement. This is a contract, your marriage license. And to suggest that you should just blindly sign it without reading any terms and conditions, without protecting yourself, without having conversations around that. If you did that in business, people would think so much less of you for just signing anything and not reading a contract. And yet we ask people to do that all the time when it comes to marriage. So yeah, of course, it should be about love and it should be about trust, and that should be the bedrock of things. But it is fundamentally a contractual obligation and also a huge financial decision that you're making. And this person breached that in a massive, massive way. And I get that, of course, there are emotions tied up in it, but that's going to be so hard to actually, you might be able to forgive, but you certainly should not forget. And that's going to just kind of seep into the rest of your marriage.
And to your point, yes, love is a big factor in marriage, but I think trust is above love by far, especially if you're thinking of, please don't have a kid with this man. Like, that is so scary to me. Like, this guy, who, drop his name, girl. That's all.
Well, that further enmeshes your financial life with this person too.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I will say I had a similar situation with, going to be vague, but family, and where someone was hiding debt and lying about things, not because they lost their job, because they had a spending addiction, was hiding a lot of debt. And they worked it out for almost a decade, but eventually not the same betrayal, but another betrayal happened. And that was like, and the person who was betrayed for a second time, like, you want to talk about a bitter person, because they're like, I was hoodwinked into forgiving this person, and I really underestimated that it wasn't about the money, it was about the lying. And that is something that is can't forgive these men. All right. Should I use half of my savings to wipe out my credit card debt?
How much do you have saved?
Like, this is all I got, girl.
Yeah. It depends. That's the answer to every personal finance question, by the way. But if you use half of your savings to wipe out your credit card debt, but then you are only left with, let's say, enough money for 1 month of your life if you should lose your job or if something major should happen, then probably not half. You really want to make sure you're still protecting having a healthy emergency savings account if you already have it. And I know that sounds counterintuitive. If you also have debt, you just want to get rid of it. But you also just want to make sure that you are not putting yourself in a more vulnerable situation than if something big did happen, all of a sudden you're back in credit card debt. My recommendation is always, if you are trying to pay off any sort of debt, but even consumer debt like credit card debt, that you have a minimum of 1 month's worth of living expenses in an emergency savings account. So not $1,000 like some people say. That's not going to do anything for most of us. At least 1 month, so rent or mortgage, transportation expenses, basic bills, everything you need to keep the lights on and food on the table, that's the amount you need in your emergency savings while paying off debt. So if half of your savings means you come below that number, then no. If it means you still have that number, all right, sure, wipe it out.
While we're trashing Dave Ramsey, I would like to just say $1,000 as an emergency fund is crazy in any case, but like, baby, it's 2025. Do you know how far $1,000 goes? Because it's not a month of rent. It's not groceries. It's not gas. It's not car note. It's not anything. Like, you are basically $1,000. If that's all you have, like, you are essentially, that's not an emergency fund. That's like, you get maybe another week before you're on the street. Like, that is such an insanely low number to recommend to people. And I have such a resentment for this like approach to personal finance in general that is like so debt phobic to the point of putting people at just like a razor's edge. And I do think that, like, yes, in an ideal world, you should only be using credit cards insofar as they allow you to become a Delta millionaire. That's obviously the highest aspiration. But I also think like credit cards do play a role, and wiping out your savings entirely to get rid of your credit card debt. Yes, if you can do it comfortably, but like, we just need to get more comfortable with the idea that carrying some debt is probably still preferable to having no debt, but literally nothing in your bank account. Like, debt isn't the worst possible thing in the world. It just needs to be managed.
Yeah, and that having nothing in your savings account puts you at a lot of risk. That makes you really vulnerable.
Yes,
because and that is exactly when Murphy's Law will hit, and your dog will eat a bag of brownie mix, or a tire will blow out on your car, or something will happen that will be expensive and probably more than $1,000.
I need to share an anecdote on that note of a friend who had to go into credit card debt for a pet related reason. This person had a cat, and a friend of theirs was like crashing on her couch, way overstaying their welcome to begin with, was not paying anything, was not contributing to any household expenses. The one rule of this house was do not leave the window open because the cat, I'm sorry, everyone's face in this room went, the cat lives. But long story short, this person did leave the window open, and then the cat, lo and behold, fell from a 4th-story window here in New York City, had extensive veterinary bills, to which the unwanted house guest replied, "I will signal boost the GoFundMe."
Nope. That's a friend to cut out of your life.
I think about that story every single day. It haunts my dreams. Because honestly, Yikes. At this point, like, we're going to have to fight physically. Like, there's no way you could just let that ride. But suffice to say, to your point, you never know where those massive expenses are going to come.
Yep.
You never know where or when. Okay, last question, which I think feeds into the debt stuff. How can I curb my emotional spending, which is getting me into more and more trouble every day?
Well, it'd be great if there was a simple solve to that.
Stop.
Just knock it off.
Don't do it. Next.
Asked and answered.
Asked and answered. Stamp.
So a couple of options, but the main thing that you're going to need to do is address your why. So I feel like your impulse right now is to try to control the outcome, which is that something happens and it makes you want to spend. So you're trying to control the spend factor. You need to figure out what is causing the impulse. So what is making you want to spend money impulsively? And is it because that's your stress trigger? That's how you respond to stress? Is it there's something chronically happening in your life? Is there an endorphin loop that happens for you when you spend? And so anytime you're feeling down, your impulse is then to spend money to make yourself feel better. There is a cause here. This is a therapist question, I would say. But obviously there are also, if you feel like this is a full-blown shopping addiction, there are all sorts of support groups for that. But definitely seek out therapy. Could even maybe be financial therapy. Could be a good answer for figuring out the root cause. But if you want to just do a little bit of introspective work, one of my favorite ways to handle this is to start tracking every penny for at least, I'm going to say a minimum of 2 weeks in this case, where every single time you make a purchase, no matter how you're making it, you write down what, like the date, time, what it was, how much you spent, and then I want you to note your emotional state when you made that purchase. So you're going to start looking for trends about when you want to buy something, the type of thing that you want to buy, and how you're feeling when you make that purchase.
Well said. I will also say, as someone who has very much struggled with anxiety her whole life, which used to manifest in spending problems and got myself into a ton of debt, self-soothing mechanisms tend to jump around. And to your point, the most important thing to do is address the underlying cause, which I think we often underestimate. So I've talked a lot on the channel. I've struggled with sugar addiction for a very long time because it's a way that I self-soothe when I'm very anxious. And it's taken to pretty recently to understanding that a lot of our emotional impulses and psychological impulses are actually, there is a very physical aspect to them. So for me, like having very, very unregulated blood sugar and like a lot of blood sugar problems was actually really reinforcing the cycle of anxiety and reinforcing the cycle of, then maladaptive behaviors. One thing I would look into with a shopping addiction is to really do as much as possible, not necessarily a shopping addiction, but an emotional spending cycle, which can in many cases lead to shopping addiction, is to look at the psychosomatic, the physical aspect of it as much as you do the psychological one. Totally agree with therapy, important to address. But for example, like get your blood work done. Are you like deficient in something? Are you getting enough exercise? Are you getting enough sleep? Like really try to address all the physical aspects, because I think we often underestimate how much of, for example, the marketing cycle it causes physical reactions in us. It causes dopamine rushes. It causes our heart to race. It causes us to feel a whole range of emotions that are in our head, but also in our body. Also think about, like, for example, I will never, ever set foot in a grocery store unless I am full. I just won't do it, because the hunger cues make you insane and irrational and make you make bad purchases. Similarly, are you shopping when you're tired, when you're, in a heightened emotional state? Are you doing it after a long day when you're physically exhausted? Like, try to really look at the physical patterns of your life and understand how much of our consumer culture is predicated on taking advantage of us not operating at our best or feeling at our best. Women, the beauty industry, the clothing industry, so much of this is predicated on us not feeling good in our bodies and therefore offering us solutions that involve spending money. So as someone who's dealt with this for a very long time and who's seen that kind of emotional regulation cycle bounce from thing to thing, I highly recommend taking a look as well at the physical aspect of it. One other thing I would recommend is someone who used to have a serious emotional spending problem. I had to have loved ones intervene, in the sense that for quite a period of time, I had other people physically hold my credit cards. I gave other people access to my accounts because I couldn't be accountable to myself, and I needed to know that I was accountable to someone else and that I didn't have access to the things that I could use to essentially harm myself financially. There can be a lot of shame in it, and we are not all privileged enough to have a trusted person in our life who could be that person for us. But if you do have someone, a family member, a loved one, a close friend, a spouse, whatever the case may be, and you don't feel that you're yet in the position where you can trust yourself, hand someone else the keys. I did it, and it really helped me.
Another final point on all of that too is that sometimes the interesting reason that people will self-sabotage financially is because that ultimately is their financial comfort zone, particularly if you grew up in an environment that was maybe financially chaotic, particularly if there were boom and bust cycles in the household. Ultimately, you might say that it was stressful, but it might feel actually emotionally comfortable because it's what you know. Mm-hmm. So sometimes people will also do that to themselves, where they finally get a really strong footing, and then all of a sudden they will self-sabotage and, subconsciously or not, spend a lot of money, make a big financial decision, do something to put themselves back in a cycle that ultimately they understand better and are comfortable in.
Very well said. All right, guys, that's it for today. Erin, thank you.
Wonderful to be here.
Wonderful to have you. Where can everyone go to read more of everything you do?
Well, all of my books are available wherever books are sold. Shop local, please. Or at the library. And if it's not there, request it.
Or use bookshop.org.
Yes. And then on Instagram at Broke Millennial Blog. And you can also find me on Substack under Broke Millennial. If you just want to send an email, brokemillennial.com.
Follow her on Instagram, but then yell at her to post more.
All right, I'll get better at it.
Post more.
Been taking a hiatus.
The posting community has never needed your voice more. All right, guys, thank you. We'll see you next week at Asked and Answered.